We are live and ready to go.
So I'd like to call the Planning Commission meeting to order. It is 6:07 or thereabouts. So, okay, 6:04 on June 4th, 2025. And if the clerk could call the roll.
Commissioner Forsberg,
Here.
Commissioner Sweet,
Here.
Commissioner Kroll,
He's muted.
Yeah, he unmuted and unmuted. There he is.
I can't hear. Commissioner Ryan here. And Commissioner Kroll, is your audio working? Henry, can you hear us? I don't think your audio is working. We cannot hear you. We still cannot hear you.
Got another microphone I can try.
Okay, that one worked. Now we can hear you. Okay. We have 4 members here, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And then if I could get a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll make a motion.
And a second.
I can second that.
Any discussion? And then if the clerk could call the roll.
Commissioner Forsberg,
Yes.
Commissioner Sweet,
Yes.
Commissioner Kroll,
Yes.
and Commissioner Ryan.
Yes.
Thank you. And then the next item is approval of minutes. If I could get a motion for that.
I'll make a motion.
And a second.
I can second the motion.
Thank you. And then is there any discussion? And if the clerk could call the roll.
For the approval of minutes, Commissioner Forsberg,
Yes.
Commissioner Sweet,
Yes.
Commissioner Kroll,
Yes.
and Commissioner Ryan.
Yes.
It's 4 yeas, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And then
Merch.
the there are no are there any, I guess, are there any public comments on regarding items not on the agenda?
I'm not seeing any.
Okay. And then we have no public hearings prior notice for this meeting.
Correct.
And do we have any consideration of site plans?
No, Madam Chair.
Okay, so then we'll go to item H, commission business, and the first order of business is on the ordinance 2509, and shall I pass that on to staff to make the presentation and discussion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was hoping to prepare a memo for you guys before this meeting, but unfortunately did not have time. So I will just walk you through this verbally, and we'll hopefully be able to get through all of it. The Seldovia City Council held another work session on the draft ordinance 2509 on May 14th, 2025. So just a couple of weeks ago, and had a couple of more items that needed some work. So they provided those suggestions to staff. Staff worked on them. We're bringing them back to Planning Commission to get your guys' thoughts on this draft, and then and if there are any additional changes. And if it looks good, then it can go back to council, and they, depending on changes or not, could potentially have another work session, or be introduced. So I think they left that up to staff depending on how it looked. Am I recalling that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you, Clerk Diamond. So I'll just go through these changes with you if you want to follow along with me. The ordinance itself begins on page 7 of the packet. And starting out with a bang on page 8, one of the things that the council discussed that was lacking was that new couple of items, not new items, but a couple of items had newly listed administrative permits for approvals under the land use table. And while administrative permits are included as part of long-term residential rental in the commercial business district in Title 18, there isn't a separate place to discuss the process for administrative permits. So what we were going towards was an administrative permits or approvals. If you remember the definition, well, I guess it wasn't a definition. It was the way it was stated in the land use table. Was it an administrative permit or approval? However, in looking at some of the other municipalities' codes, and in particular Wasilla's, where some of this language comes from, they actually separated that out, and they had an administrative approval or an administrative permit, depending on the type of approval needed. And I appreciated that because a couple of the areas that we talk about needing an administrative permit or administrative approval were business that was happening on public lands. And with that, the city approves it in a variety of ways or can approve it in a variety of ways. So I think that calls out that approval is needed in order to conduct that business or small manufacturing on public land, but maybe not necessarily need a full administrative permit. And then also what it does is it calls out the administrative permit for the long-term residential rentals. We don't have anything else right now requiring an administrative permit, but in the future, the section can be expanded if that's the case. So with that in mind, you can see everything in yellow. I tried to just, for consistency, I only highlighted the things that were changed. And so that 1818 administrative approvals and permits is new to this draft, and it discusses that those land uses requiring a permit or approval are designated in the Seldovia Municipal Code 1870 land use table as either AP for permit or AAA for administrative approval. And this has some of those standard procedures that we're used to seeing for permits in following the rest of the Seldovia Municipal Code. So it also just makes sure to call out that there are other things that do require permits, such as building permits, zoning, that require applications such as building permits, zoning amendments, conditional use, and variances. And then it calls out that the city manager or their designee may approve either the AA or the AP as provided in the land use table, and that those are in there as the intent to provide assistance to developers in locating and designing uses. And I think I'm going to strike that out. In uses to be in conformance with the neighborhood character and adopted municipal code policies and standards. And then furthermore, the application is on a form supplied by the city, and an appropriate fee must be submitted to the city, and a permit or approval must be granted prior to commencement of the use. Administrative approval discusses that a rental lease, business license, building permit, or other designated city application may constitute an application for administrative approval. If the accepted application is for an administrative approved use, the city manager or their designee may issue an approval. Approval of an application by lease must be granted by the city manager with approval. I should say may. See, good thing I'm reading this out. May be granted by the city manager with the approval of council by resolution in accordance with Seldovia Municipal Code 618-200, because they have to approve leases. So for instance, if somebody's in a kiosk and it's approved by lease by the council for that use, then there's an administrative approval because it's been approved by the city and by the council. The city manager may place reasonable conditions on the approval to ensure the use will comply with adopted municipal code policies and standards. So, noises and smells and things, making sure that those things are not occurring per municipal code. The administrative permit should be on a form supplied by the city, and there is a form, and I'm for the long-term residential rentals, and I'm sorry that we did not include that in this packet. I don't believe we should have, but it is online. And we are working on a planning update to the website. The city clerk it's a big project, but we're going to split out that planning page into the different permit and application pages. And then potentially we've discussed having a page that's just for the commercial business or central business once, and if that gets approved, to discuss the uniqueness of the district and the expectations for individuals in that district of having, a business and some helpful ways that we can or some ways that we can help in a sense to make it smoother for everybody. So that is coming. But we do currently have a permit, an application for long-term residential rentals, which would be the form supplied by the city. If accepted, the application, the accepted application is in conformance with the adopted municipal code policy and standards, the city manager or their designee may issue an approval. And then again, the city manager may place reasonable conditions on the approval to ensure that the use will comply and conform with adopted municipal code policies and standards. And then it discusses that long-term residential rental administrative permit falls under this section of code, and that you can see the further information about the administrative permit for long-term residential rentals in central business district as established in SMC 185250 and listed in the land use table and SMC 1870-040. And if the accepted application is in accordance with 1852-050, it can be approved. So making sure that that's clear.
Hey, Heidi?
Yes.
All right, I should say something different, but I mean, the procedure here, but on the paragraph about administrative permits and the A beyond it. It says the city manager may issue an approval. Wouldn't they be issuing a permit?
Yes.
Okay, so that would be, there's 3 places where it would be permit instead of approval, I guess.
Well, but in the AA, it would be,
You're just approving the permit?
no, you're just making an approval.
Oh, yeah, AA, but on the AP.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, it sounds really good.
Okay. Then moving on to page 10. Again, we have that definition, and I don't know why the numbers got really weird. That wasn't like that on my computer. It's supposed to just be XX, so I didn't have to renumber everything. But I will when the next draft goes to the council. And it's supposed to be administrative approval and permit, and approval made by the city manager or their designee under SMC 1818 without public notice. Just that was what it stated in Wasilla's, and I thought that made it, and maybe it should be an approval made by the city manager or their designee without public notice under, now that I'm reading that again, and swap those two. because that's what the code is saying, is that the administrator is permitting it and it's not coming to the planning commission or anywhere else. Though I suppose and I don't suppose, but it is provided in code that if there's a grievance or an appeal, that they can bring that to the commission. So then, and I don't know if you guys want anything further with that. It was pretty simple. It's what Wasilla's had, and it seemed like keep it simple, and it tells you where to refer back to it at, and that's the information. So if anybody has anything else they want to add, please let me know. And on page 13, this is where we really need a call out from help from the commission. There was discussion, and the mayor brought this up a couple times, and there was really good discussion about it at the last work session on how it's really confusing. In the land use table, everything is talking about uses except for dwellings, and that was talking about a structure. And the council provided direction on this, and it seemed like the intent was in that discussion that buildings in that district can still be built as a residential building, and that's been allowed since we went back into the records earlier this week, since urban renewal. And so since the late 60s and early 70s, this has been an ongoing practice that the buildings can be residential buildings as long as they have a business or a commercial purpose. And it appeared from the council, from what they said, that that's a practice that they want to still allow and continue. And so it was a discussion on how to list these definitions and list it on the land use table, that it makes it clear that residential uses are secondary in the commercial business district, but you could still have, a duplex or an apartment or some type of building with multiple units. We did include in here that dwelling single family, so just a house, is not permitted. And that's been longstanding. So unless anybody wants to see that change, that is still not permitted, just like a B&B would not be, I think. Was it B&B was not, or was secondary? Let me look at the table before I speak out of turn. But that if somebody wanted to build a dwelling multifamily residential, I guess I should take that back. A dwelling multifamily residential is secondary, and or a dwelling unit attached residential. So you can have a dwelling, it's just secondary to the main purpose. And so you'll see that change in the land use table. On page 31, dwelling multifamily residential, secondary dwelling single family not permitted, because if they were operating out of that, then it would be a home occupation. Dwelling unit attached residential secondary. And then, so that was my question to the commission, is does this make sense in this form? Are there other definitions that are needed or changes? And these definitions do also came mostly from Wasilla, with a few tweaks to make them more applicable to Seldovia. But while I was in there, I took a peek and was like, oh, look, they have dwelling single family and dwelling multifamily, and that seems to make sense here, and what the intent is. But where I got stuck, and so then the dwelling unit attached multi-residential makes sense to take that out, because it's relatively the same as the dwelling multi-family residential. And Yep, just making sure there, and the land uses stay the same. So really, that's just swapping out for that one. Dwelling multifamily residential, the language is changing from dwelling unit attached multi-residential. And that attached multi-residential, other than the residential special residential special multifamily district, which I was changed to not applicable. The rest of those land uses stay the same. But where I got caught up was, is there a need to have a limit or to have the figures in here? I'm not really sure what the history is of containing 4 or less units or containing 5 or more units. And do those need to be called out separately? And we're looking not just commercial business district, but thinking as a community as a whole. For instance, the dwelling unit structures containing 5 or more is a conditional use and residential, conditional use and waterfront commercial residential, and permitted in commercial, but less than 5 units is differs. It's permitted in residential, permitted in waterfront commercial, and conditional in commercial. And I could see where you would be saying, and like, for instance, okay, let's just do an exercise here. Dwelling multifamily residential and dwelling single family are conditional in commercial. And then if you say 4 or less units is conditional, and maybe you don't need that if you're just saying overall that those are conditional. But let's see. Dwelling units, structures containing 5 or more is permitted. So you can build a big apartment complex in commercial if it has 5 or more units. But if it doesn't, if it has less, then you need a conditional use permit in your commercial zone. And then same or opposite for waterfront commercial residential, which those lots are small. The majority of those lots along the slough are teeny tiny and don't conform with standards because of their size. So they're having a multifamily residential or a single family permitted, but if you want to have a structure with 5 or more apartments, it's conditional. So I could see where that might be applicable if you're saying we don't want just, we want to encourage business and commercial district, and we don't necessarily want houses. Like that's not the primary focus, but we want to discourage big apartment complexes and waterfront commercial. But smaller houses are okay. I don't know. I'm gonna stop talking there. I will say that's the same thing in residential. Permitted multifamily, permitted single, but conditional use again for those big structures. So I would love feedback on is there a need to make sure that we're calling out those large 5 or more apartment structures, and thinking maybe we don't necessarily have it now, but if we did in the future, what does that look like, and what's that look like for the future of Seldovia?
Well, it looks like that you're looking on page 32 of the land use table.
31.
31, okay, but the lodging thing with 5 or more units is on 32. Is there a different place with 5 or more?
Yeah, the residential. So
Oh, the multifamily residential,
yeah,
but is that 5 or more?
no, not the multifamily. It's crossed out at the bottom. Dwelling unit structures containing 5 or more.
Okay,
And I guess that would be different than the lodging, the hotel motel. The hotel motel is like an overnight rental, and we're talking more long-term rentals.
Okay,
And I-
that's all.
or
gone.
residential uses.
If I may. Would you allow the public to speak?
Yes, I would allow the public to speak.
Um, I wonder if there's different regulation for the larger buildings. And
Sure.
that's why they have them separated out, similar to a hotel motel having different regulation than a lodge or bed and breakfast.
Sure, and we did discuss that through the chair. That was discussed as part of the subcommittee. So maybe it just holds that language, maybe the 4 or less is not necessary since it's covered under multifamily and single family, but maybe dwelling structures containing 5 or more units should stay in there.
Well, why not just have it 2 or more, and there's a conditional, and you gotta have a conditional use, so you're reviewing it, and unless there is some code thing that,
I believe, if I may, when we were discussing this and we looked at the building codes, that the 5 or more required a commercial construction and some other.
Like they might probably have fire codes.
Fire.
Right, right.
So it required like a plan and with the state, so that's. But the state fire marshal's office.
And so, just to clarify, and that is separate and distinct from what we would require. It's just for just understanding that that is an additional requirement by another authorizing agency. And that's, so does that influence whether we should have it called out here or no?
That's a good question. I don't know that it influences whether we should have it called out. But we would want to make sure that the person doing that construction was following that. Oh, I would think.
I think it's more than that. I think it's, where those types of structures are situated in the community. When
Okay,
you're
'cause
talking about zoning.
we're not taking responsibility for assuring that people are following the code. They're expected to do that, and we don't have any way of inspecting it. So it's kind of, again, kind of in that context of zoning as opposed to authorizing building in terms of the type of requirements that are associated with it. So kind of going back to why we would call it out in the land use table, it's because of the impact in the zoning area from a larger scale facility. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
So I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I think the way that we had done it for all of the other categories, I think we called it out if it had a different requirement when we went through it as a subcommittee.
And it does have different land uses, which was what draws my attention to, there's different regulations on it. So unless there's a change, I guess that's unless there's a reason that the commission would like to change those existing regulations and making sure that it stays in there. Dwelling unit. So we could just keep that.
So, and the one that you're keeping is, you're thinking needs to be kept is, I'm not necessarily questioning, I'm the issue, I just am just wanting to clarify which one we're wanting that you're thinking we should keep.
The 5 or more, it's different than the rest.
Okay,
The dwelling unit structures containing 5 or more unit.
It's striked out on here currently, but before it was permitted in your RSM, residential special multifamily district. And I think that that's important to note.
Yeah. That is permitted. Yep, that makes sense. Okay. Okay,
so
Does that
just
make
to be
sense to
clear,
everybody else?
we're just we're recommending not to delete, so just leaving the dwelling unit structures containing 5 or more units.
Yes.
But the dwelling multifamily residential, would it have to be specified 2 to 4?
It could be. It could be in parentheses 2 to 4.
I'm not sure if it would be, I think it would be beneficial in our definitions to have examples of what that would look like, to help clarify for individuals looking at our definitions and saying, well, what is the difference between a multifamily versus a 5 or more unit? And if we talk about the 5 or more unit, it would be as an, like, i.e. apartment complex.
Mhm.
I don't know, or a multifamily residential, i.e. a duplex.
Mhm. Duplex or triplex or fourplex.
Right.
Above that is.
I
yeah.
think as a person not on planning and zoning and that would look through this and say, hey, what could I put on my properties? I think that would be beneficial.
Okay.
And just to clarify, I may, the one that we would put back in that line, dwelling unit structures containing 5 or more units, that would be not permitted still in the commercial or central business district.
Correct. Unless it was for long-term residential or hotel motel or some kind of a business purpose. You can do it as a business.
But it is in waterfront commercial residential. Conditional.
Conditional, but I was going to point out on the zoning map, there are several properties that are substantial in size in our WCR zone.
Yeah.
That could be able to house. I think that through your zoning laws already, like meeting the setbacks, meeting your height constraints, that will already reduce where those would be allowed.
So any further discussion on that? So so just, again, we're putting back in the dwelling units containing 5 or more, and the recommendation was to give an example as far as apartments, and then the dwelling multifamily residential with the addition of examples of a duplex, triplex, or fourplex, and 2 to 4 units.
Okay. I can work on that. Other language, so if you go back to that page 13. So the dwelling multifamily residential, use or structure designed for or occupied by 2 or more families as a residence. And I think that was important for the council that we call out that residential purpose for these buildings. So then again, dwelling single family is a use or residential structure. And I did keep the structure in this part because we are talking about single family homes in particular in this zone to be occupied by a family as a residence. And you can see what's not highlighted is previous language that was in here, and that includes prefabricated structures like mobile homes that are not constructed on and that is an integral part of the structure. So that's in there, and then taking out dwelling unit because we're doubling down now. And then dwelling unit attached residential, striking out that initial definition the existing definition, and then having, so it's consistent with the others, a use or residential unit consisting of a portion of a structure providing independent and complete cooking, living, sleeping, and toilet facilities for residents of a family as a residence. So we could probably take the first 4 residents out. This is, like I said, language from Wasilla, and then I added the as a residence. So it could be for a family and toilet facilities for a family as a residence. Do those make sense?
Yeah. It seems like, why do you need the word habit for family? I mean. Just adds more words. Because a family was defined here as like a person, one or more
Yep.
persons.
One or more persons occupying a dwelling
So-
unit.
You have an independent, complete cooking, living, sleeping, and toilet facilities, period.
As a residence.
So if we're adding back in the dwelling unit, 5 or more units, what definition would that tie back to?
The multifamily. So just clarifying that, what a multifamily above 4 is an apartment complex, and it might be separate. And I can look at that further. Unless anybody has immediate thoughts on it.
My only immediate thought was on the land use table, it might have to change. Differentiate whether it's dwelling or dwelling unit. Make sure it goes back to the
Mhm.
definitions.
Yeah, absolutely.
You could potentially have a subcategory A
Oh, yeah.
like you do in other areas.
Good. Any other suggestions? That one? Okay, then the next change is gonna be on page 16. There was a couple smaller changes. One of these, there was a lettering that was off. It was skipped right to D and I changed it to C. I didn't highlight that. Cole pointed it out and I was thankful for it. I just made that change, but, under lodging, we included, for the recommendation of the council at that work session. The language to going back again to that permit, that an administrative permit is required for long-term residential rentals operating as a primary purpose in the central business district. And then following up again of where you could find that information on that administrative permit. So that's an 18-18-025, 18-52050. That's the land use table, correct? Nope, that's not the land. Oh, sorry, that's the commercial, central business district that talks about long-term residential. So administrative permit and then a specific long-term residential administrative permit.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
If someone wanted to live in the district as their residence and not rent it to someone else as their residence, would they be allowed to with this permit?
No.
No.
They,
Okay.
so for instance, there is an entity in town that is a corporation or an LLC, whatever it is,
Mhm.
and they rent to themselves
Mm-hmm.
and they pay that rent and they pay that sales tax.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's not happening in this district, but it is happening in a different district. And I guess in that way, it would be a rental and they would have to have a permit and they would pay sales tax and that would be their business.
Okay.
But they're paying it to themselves. basically.
Correct.
Not the sales
Not the
tax,
sales.
but
They-
the rent.
They found a loop.
Yeah, if they. So,
They gotta pay the extra, that tax. I mean, they're gonna do that.
I mean, it is a business. And I do know of an instance where that occurs, so I don't.
Okay.
Not really sure if that should be addressed or needs to be addressed,
It's up to you guys.
or how to address that.
And basically, they're conforming with the law as it is stated, both our code and they're complying with the corporate code and taxes. So
Right.
at this point, I mean, I think that might be something to take up in the future, but in terms of what we're attempting to do here, and I think we also have to be consistent with it, people are complying with the laws that are existing, then it's, then that seems like that should stand, unless there's a different approach to evaluate it.
Yeah. I just didn't know.
Yeah, I mean, it could, yeah.
So while we're on this page, Commissioner Ryan provided some excellent questions. And I don't know if you wanted to talk about junkyard at all and why it's under manufacturing. There's just a question of why it was under there, and it did fall under the same land uses, land use types per districts for that kind of large scale operation. But if you wanted to look at moving that back out and having it as a separate category, it's fine. It would just be standalone with those same types
Well,
if it doesn't make sense.
thinking you have manufacturing slash fabricating slash assembly, you have slash disassembly or something like,
Mhm.
just because it's all of a sudden you have all these things and then we're talking about junk. It just. I don't know. Seemed not.
So we're adding a disassembly to it.
Yeah, I don't know. It just seems it really wasn't manufactured. It's opposite of manufacturing. It's yeah. I don't know. I hate to have another category. I mean, it's nice to combine things like this, so.
Mhm.
I mean, you could just put slash junkyard in the title. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like we have the splitting and the lumping. And so if
Yeah.
you want to split it, you could just split it in the title and then call it good, or
However you
Like I
guys
could
want.
see another type of industry like that could be a recycling that's kind of like in
Uh-huh.
that same vein. It's not necessarily junk.
Uh-huh.
so then disassembly might be a good catch-all for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it enables, yeah.
Okay. And then to touch on, if you don't mind me calling out your question on the section about marijuana, even though that isn't necessarily germane to the discussion, those are in there separately per Alaska law.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so AMCO does treat those differently than alcohol and tobacco, and we even have our own section just on marijuana in Title 18.
That's not how we voted it in.
Yeah, it can be permitted. It's just a conditional use because you have to be able to adhere to all of the AMCO requirements. And there's, can't be so far, can't be so close to a school and
Right.
all of those, there's different requirements for where these activities can take place. So it's a way to have a little
Do
bit
they
of
have that
oversight.
same sort of thing for alcohol?
Nope.
Okay, the reason I always bring it up is because I thought if we voted on this, it turned out differently, but it was marijuana was supposed to be treated the same as alcohol. But it's not. Okay, that's all.
Okay, so moving then to page 20. Again, updating that definition for residents, and per Wasila's definition and meeting our residence definitions now under dwelling, but a residence or residential is a use or accessory uses involving the occupation of a building for living, cooking, sleeping, and includes a single family dwelling, duplexes, or multifamily dwelling. So tying that all back together. Any thoughts on that one? Then under setback on page 21, it was brought up that that maybe there should be some clarification because this has been an issue in the past that if your eaver overhang and really no matter where it's at, should not allow for snow shed on public or neighboring properties. So having snow guards or some way, to ensure that that snow is landing on your property. Because that makes kind of a mess if it's landing on your neighbors or on city streets or walkways after cleaned up and people are going back and repeating work and just costing more money and time. Contain your snow.
Don't snow.
Yeah. And then on page, where is it? Above that, school. Commissioner Ryan again brought a point that under the definition of school, any public, religious, or nonprofit facility providing a general curriculum of academic or vocational instruction, serving any or all grades between kindergarten and 12th grade. The question was, can it end at instruction? Does it need to state serving any or all grades between kindergarten and 12th grade? Can it just be a public or religious or nonprofit facility providing a general curriculum of academic or vocational instruction?
I like that.
Okay, taking that last part out. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I had one thought is that when we tie back the schools for things like the marijuana permits and everything, if that goes back to school, a place with instruction that is adult instruction or any kind of instruction might fall into that category if we don't specifically call out that it's for
Minors.
minors. That would be my only.
We could look at that and see if we need to include it for minors.
And all the marijuana uses are all conditional, so you'd be reviewing that if it was near school.
Okay. And then moving on. So Commissioner Ryan, your question on so-and-so means,
Oh, yeah. I was wondering if you could understand that.
yeah, so.
It's just that there's many examples in the definitions where
Mhm.
it's just a mobile home, a factory assembled structure, and then you get to things like, it'll say lot. Lot means a legally described land. Why don't you just say lot, a legally described parcel? So there's just maybe half a dozen or so that's have lot, and have the same word in quotation mark, then the word means, and a couple words that don't need to be in there, seems like. And just then all the definitions
Mhm.
would start the same way.
Sure. I mean, if we're cleaning up definitions and we're
Yeah.
touching on all of them, if that's something you guys want, I can go ahead and make that change.
I think,
Less words.
yeah,
Yeah.
Okay. Remove all means.
Because it's all like.
search and delete.
Yeah, the parentheses and. Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
I see a lot of strikeouts, but I think
Yeah.
it'll be fine. Okay.
And Commissioner Kroll, are just checking in with you. Did you have any feedback, or are you okay with everything as the discussion has been going on?
Yeah, that looks pretty good so far.
Alrighty, thank you, sir.
And then did you, Commissioner Ryan, want to talk about business definitions or anything else before we move out of definitions?
Well, I thought we were simplifying all these things. It seems like there's more categories. I don't know, it just seemed like,
In the land use table, it's simplified.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
much better in land use table. And maybe that's it. You just want to have something defined if people have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I'm not sure if it would be possible or not, but I know how we took all of the business categories and made a business category. I wonder if we could do something similar with industrial and then have the junkyard fall under industrial as the top category. But,
Isn't that what it is with the manufacturing and large industrials?
it falls under manufacturing as the main word.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So changing those words to,
But so in your old land use table, there were a handful of items under industrial land use types. And I feel like we would still have to separate out some of those. On junkyard specific, the differences would go from not permitted to conditional on several of the districts. Which I don't know if that's a terrible thing or not. Since it would have to be approved or not approved.
junkyards would go from not permitted to conditional.
If we moved it. Yeah. I don't know.
But I guess in terms of the commercial business district, we would not want a junkyard in the commercial business
Correct.
district.
It's still not permitted in that district.
S- And so you were talking about conditional in other districts, is that?
Yeah. But our manufacturing and assembly. Small. Okay, so our old manufacturing, fabricating and assembly, industrial, large scale. Before it was conditional in C district, permitted in I district. Conditional, which it is the same now. Okay, for manufacturing, fabricating and assembly. Junkyard was permitted in C district, permitted in I district. Not permitted in CV or CR. And if we moved it into the same category as manufacturing, fabricating, assembly, it would be conditional.
No, because the small scale and large scale is separated out, isn't it? Let me look here. The large scale is still not.
The large scale for fabricating and assembly is conditional.
Oh. So we don't want that in there anyways. Interesting. Good catch.
Would it make sense to pull junkyard back out of the category?
Mm-hmm. And have it as an industrial. I see what you're saying.
Anything. Anything with the junkyard. Anywhere probably should be conditional. Everywhere, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
in any district,
As opposed to not permitted?
well, no,
You did not.
yeah.
So
But
either not permitted or.
all the
conditional.
places permitted. Probably
Should be conditional instead of
Yeah.
permitted,
You-
just so that you have the maximum control and
yeah,
determining what actually happens.
So similarly, lumberyard, we lumped into that manufacturing large scale. And it has more permissions now than it did before.
Because it was pretty much the same
It was-
except for commercial residential.
It is very similar, but instead of in the commercial business district, it was not permitted and now it's conditional.
Yeah, so we don't necessarily want to do that. Okay. So pull those out and make those industrial.
Possibly
That's a,
Like I pull which ones out?
lumberyard and junkyard. Out of the manufacturing, fabricating large scale.
and that makes sense because under that manufacturing, fabricating, large scale, that really was talking more about seafood processing in that discussion and how that could be a conditional use. So.
So what I'm hearing you guys say is that as far as the junkyard and the lumberyard, would those both be conditional wherever they were? So that you had control over what went into any particular district? And then the manufacturing, assembly, et cetera, that's where the junkyard would come out of that. And then that would just stay as it was.
So it almost seems like we're not ready for this yet, and maybe junkyard and lumberyard need to just stay out in the way they were. And if that was the case, we can get rid of the manufacturing large for now. And just have the small scale and then do seafood processing also on its own.
Well, I think we still liked the manufacturing large scale.
But you don't have anything that is under it.
They wouldn't have any other.
You could still have it as a definition.
Yeah, keep definition.
And just have it
I
not
mean-
have subcategories.
I'm not sure.
And keep seafood under it. And it's kind of its own thing and has seafood.
Yeah, because in the future, there might be other types of large manufacturing.
Okay. And that's a good example, but okay. And then junkyard and lumberyard will stay what they were before.
And they will be conditional in all cases.
No, they're not permitted in almost all cases, but the ones where they would be permitted could be conditional. So right now, junkyard is not permitted anywhere except for commercial and industrial, and it is permitted. And then lumberyard is not permitted anywhere but commercial and industrial, and then it's a conditional use and commercial residential to have a lumberyard. So
So
we'll just keep them the same.
would it, so I'm just wondering if having it be conditional where it might be permitted may be helpful, just so that you have an additional level of control in terms of where it might go.
So having, instead of it being permitted in commercial and industrial, have them both be conditional?
Because I think it just that way you can at least evaluate
An extra layer.
an extra layer, because I mean, a junkyard definitely has an impact on other entities, and so it would be good to evaluate it.
For sure.
And a lumberyard could, I mean, it doesn't have as much, but if it can be an area where there's a lot of traffic and there's a lot of activity, so it could, that you may want to have
Yeah.
evaluation in that situation as well. Not that you want to necessarily prevent somebody from doing something, but it's just making sure that everybody understands what that is, and then
Yeah.
making a good decision about how that fits in.
Well, and I think that's an important, like, that's an important thing to call out, because what you're doing essentially by making it a conditional use is you're having that public process. And
I think-
so that there's more involvement in the permit of that use, and it provides that opportunity for the public to have a say.
The lumberyard would raise concerns. I could see a junkyard, definitely, but lumberyard?
Well,
If they were manufacturing lumber, that's what, like a lumber mill, that would be manufacturing,
You're talking about selling.
yeah. Just lumber stack. I don't know, doesn't seem to be as much of a concern as a junkyard. And so, like, I thought at one point we were trying to reduce the number of conditional uses. So that's why I'm kind of questioning. It could be like just permitted in industrial and commercial, because it seems like it's totally compatible with that type of zoning.
well, if the city decided to sell their waterfront industrial lot where the ice rink currently goes, that's an industrial lot
Right.
on Main Street. I don't really want to see a junkyard there.
Maybe we ought to change the zoning. If we don't want industrial uses in an area on Main Street.
But whereas a lumber yard would have been permitted there, and maybe that's a distinction between junkyard and lumber yard. Because the definition for lumber yard does say an establishment that sells sawn timber and other building materials typically stored on the premises. So not talking about necessarily a mill, but somebody who's selling lumber. And
Oh.
Well,
One of-
currently under the regulation, it's permitted in the industrial for the junkyard.
Oh, you don't want junkyards like on Main Street, but that's why I'm saying maybe that's the wrong zoning classification.
Would
Because
it,
it's an industrial, if it's in zone industrial, that you expect to have industrial uses.
One of the things, one of the things one of the reasons in my mind why I would consider having it be conditional is if you're having truck traffic in and out of a lumber yard, then that could have an impact. And it may be something that it could be a concern in an area, just but I'm just raising it, and I'm happy to, concede the issue in terms of, what the will of the body is. But that would be why I would, especially if you have a fair amount of traffic. And if you're having that in Main Street, that may be an issue, but it may not. So just a safety issue.
I mean, we could, if we want, just do the junkyard as conditional. That's also an option too,
Mhm.
if that's the will of the
Yeah.
commission, and leave the lumberyard how it is.
That sound okay? So conditional on junkyard and keep the current classification on, or keep the current permitting permitted uses as it is for lumberyard.
okay,
And then would lumberyard still be pulled out from the,
they both would be.
it would be.
Cool. Any other thoughts on definitions before we move on to the next section? Not then on page 24, we move into the CB district. And there was a lot of discussion on the purpose and uses of the district. It keeps coming around, and I think even in the commission, there was some heartburn about that requirement for incidental secondary uses that exceed 50% of the building use. So trying to soften that a little bit and still have the intent that, your primary purpose really should be the primary purpose, not the residence or the secondary use. So taking another stab at trying to define that, but where we're not really talking. I mean, we are talking about gross floor area, which seemed like a really nice term. And again, from Wasilla, incidental secondary use that exceeds the gross floor area occupied by the primary permitted use within the building or structure requires administrative approval. So again, that not a permit, but the approval by the city manager in accordance with SMC 1818-020 and subject to the following findings. That proposed incidental secondary use will not adversely impact the character, pedestrian orientation, or business vitality of the central business district. The use is consistent with the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan and central business district. The adequate parking, access, and services are available to support both the primary and secondary uses, and the structure retains the physical capacity necessary to accommodate a future return to a primary permitted use. This might be too much. But this was the example that was provided, and I did see how there could be value on having a discussion on, is it applicable that if a secondary use is exceeding a business use, does there need to be further conditions? I'm not really sure, because it's probably a secondary use as at least a residence is not, is probably not going to have more parking. But then again, if you're allowing multifamily residential as a secondary use, and you have 3 families or 4 families living in a building, how much more parking is required for that. So I'm not sure. I would love feedback. It was the example that was provided and whether that's applicable. It does seem like tying it back to the comprehensive plan could have value. And then, of course, tying it back, I mean, that seems kind of like a no-brainer, but just maybe calling that out that it needs to meet the purpose of the district. Anyways, and then also that fourth one that and I think that's important as we talk about, this building was always that way, or this building was always that, this way. We're saying, if you have the ability, the capacity to have it returned to a primary permitted use in the future. So even if it is, your house is just your apartment on your upper story is just exceeds that lower story, sure, but in the future that purpose could be that it's a rental. It could be lodging. It still has that opportunity to still be a primary permitted purpose because residential structures are allowable. I don't know. Thoughts? Too much?
I think, I think it helps clarity and I think being specific also helps inform the people that are doing these activities. So I think it is helpful.
I like it. However, I feel like number 2, tying it back to the comprehensive plan might potentially ruffle some feathers with some of the things that the city has been dealing with currently and the comprehensive plan.
Roger has Roger or Commissioner Forsberg,
Anymore.
sorry.
Nothing.
Oh, okay. Okay. I wonder, one of the things that's happening is, and there will be further discussion on developing the comprehensive plan and doing the update. And one of the things
For sure.
I think that's in what we need to do is to make sure that the public has ownership of the comprehensive plan, and that's what we're working toward. And then in terms of the planning handbook for the state, the comprehensive plan is what drives the ordinances. So I think it's important to do this so that we actually, when we have a plan, we know as a community what it is, that it's not just a doorstop on a bookshelf, but it's actually something that's a living document, and that we're making sure that that's fit for purpose and it's connected to our land use so that we can meet the spirit intent of the law. So I think overall, we've had fits and starts with how comprehensive planning has been done in the past, but now I think there's been significant discussions about making sure that we do this well and that they're integrated. And so in that vein, I think that that particular item is, it's a kind of a waypoint of what we're expecting to do in the, now and into the future. So does that any response or any feedback on that?
Like I said, I think it's great and I think that it should be included. I don't want it to be ammunition in any current issues.
So through the chair, one thing that I appreciated about it being called out is that it does call out in the current comprehensive plan, the nature of that district, the commercial business district, as well as the desire for the community to see second story residences and, primary purposes on the bottom floor. And I don't know if that's where the community is still going. But I do think that the district was, I think there's value because the district was individually called out in the code. I mean, it's a unique district, and that's why potentially when we have space and time, that's going to have its own own page and just its own, just giving it um, giving it the due that it probably should have of being different from the others and what that means. So I hear what you're saying, but I think that's hopefully a separate issue from what this process is.
And I guess just sort of following along, and I guess we'll talk about this in the comprehensive plan section of this meeting, but one of the things that I think is important is to definitely have an engagement plan with the community and to make sure that we actually that there is ownership of the comprehensive plan, and it's not just something a consultant puts in and then people are in different stages of awareness of that, and to really understand what that means. So I would strongly encourage every opportunity to engage the public and for them to take the ownership of that and what we want in our community. And any other comments on that? Commissioner Ryan?
I'm just a little confused on, okay, page 24. It starts out with all these sections, 18.52.010. But are we just ending this early, or are there none of those other, like the setbacks, and building height, all that stuff? Is that in here in the main code?
Excellent question through the chair. That is in the main code, but it's not called out in here because there's no
Okay.
changes to it. So
Okay.
to try and to try to save some paper.
Yeah, good idea. So
Just like all the sections, we're jumping around 1852, 1824, but the whole code is not in here. The whole
but then the
title.
where it goes to chapter 18.24 zoning districts.
Mhm.
What's that? There's no yellow things on there, so.
There is, but that's going to be a little bit later on. So,
Okay.
so the difference in 1824 zoning districts is that is a repeal. Nope, sorry.
I think it's just the changing.
It's
commercial to
just the
central.
changing the central.
Oh, I see it
Commercial
down
to
there.
central.
Yeah,
That's-
so the highlighted ones are the new changes
Ah.
since the ordinance went through the city council work session. It's the ones we're discussing right now.
So the next changes then are going to be in the land use table, and we already discussed the dwelling and dwellings, so I don't know if we need to discuss that further unless you guys have anything to add. And then you'll see on page 32 that lodging, long-term residential rental, and this isn't a change, but just wanting to call it out. Because now we have that process in there for administrative permit. Oops, sorry, and on the previous page, 31, business general is now AA. And I should have highlighted that at the top of the page that we did include an AA for administrative approval.
You have
one. And I forgot in the middle, woke up in the middle of the night and remembered that under 1870-030, I wanted to separate out. So as well, AP for administrative permit and then putting above that AA for administrative approval. So I'll put that in the next version.
Mhm.
Version 7. Yeah, so the AA, AP and AA is distinguished, and then storage facility and storage mini facility that came out of the discussion with the council to that mini facility actually didn't meet the need of a secondary use for storage rentals in the commercial business district, but storage facility does as a definition because it can allow for a space in a structure to be a rental space for storage as a business purpose. And so that is secondary under commercial business district and not permitted for storage mini facility under commercial business district. So that was the last change there.
So just kind of checking in on this. So given the discussion and the updates, are, what would you see? Do you see bringing this back, or are these changes such that the ordinance can be updated and provided to the city council for noticing and then doing a public hearing? What would your advice be?
If you're asking for my opinion, I think that there's enough changes here that there could be value in you guys seeing it another time. If you guys think that would be worth your time. Yeah,
Yeah,
no, number 7, we're on 6, we're going to 7.
lucky 7. Okay.
If that works for you guys, that way you guys can chime in again.
Okay,
On the
so
changes.
I'm seeing head nodding. Commissioner Kroll, would you also support reviewing the changes that were discussed today at the next meeting?
Yeah, okay.
Okay. All righty. And so
I-
that,
Sorry, I had one more question, if I may. I was curious why lodging, long-term residential rental is not applicable in the RSM. Isn't that what RSM is, your residential special multifamily district?
Yes, but I guess I was thinking more of as a sublet. What was
Oh,
it?
that makes
before?
sense.
You know, that it's not,
I don't think it was on the land use table.
it wasn't on the land use table before, so this is new. So that could be changed to permitted. I mean, they are long-term residential rentals.
Well, before you had it under permitted for dwelling units containing 5 or more units.
Sure. So make that permitted.
so don't,
But lodge was also permitted.
Okay.
I just don't want you to write yourself out of.
Well, it's like a spot zone. It's only.
I know, it's one thing, but
Yeah.
isn't that what it is?
Yeah. Yeah, and then not applicable.
Is there a difference between lodging long-term residential from all these dwelling unit definitions? Or are they? They're about the same.
The lodging is a business purpose.
Okay. And
I don't remember, because I know we talked about not applicable, but I don't remember. Why?
so do you just want to review that when you're going through the
Yes.
through the final rewrite?
For the long-term residential rental?
Yeah,
Yeah,
for the RSM, yeah. Or if it is applicable, or
sure. I mean, I think it would have to be because we're saying that the 5 or more is permitted. And then the rest are not. Yeah, we'll go through that.
okay, and then Commissioner Forsberger?
I need it.
Okay. We're at the end of our, we're at the end of the ordinance, and so we can just take a pause.
Want to do a 5-minute recess?
Sure.
Okay. Commissioner Kroll, we're gonna do a 5-minute recess. So unmute.
Thank you.
We can continue the discussion.
Okay. I, so just in order to continue on in terms of, so at this point, have we stopped are we ready to conclude our discussion of the ordinance changes? And we should, move on to the next agenda item. Is that okay with everybody? And so, sorry. Sorry, I lost my agenda. So our next agenda item is item number H2, which is the draft abatement ordinance, and we'll pass this off to the staff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is kind of a long time coming. It was with legal for a long time. If you remember, it was brought before the commission several months ago. With an initial draft of changes and then some example changes. Let's see here. There is a memorandum on page 46. And it discussed next steps and then had some enclosures, and that you'll see that chapter 8.06, which we're talking about, as it exists now, follows along with the Homer City Code for public nuisance abatement, the Wasilla Municipal Code for public nuisance, and the Houston Municipal Code for abatement of abandoned vehicles, which is ours was similar as Houston's, and because we have the same attorney. And so what they did is we went back after that meeting to legal and provided them with the information that came out of the discussion, which was pretty similar to 1 through 4, making sure that that the title was updated and the definitions that were provided from legal in the first draft ended up in this next draft. Also definitions for abandon and abandonment and updating the junk vehicle definition similar to Wasilla's. Number 3, define a public nuisance and public nuisance regulation by the city, and looking closer to the Wasilla's code. And then also providing public nuisance abatement procedures, remedies and penalties, enforcement orders and civil remedies and penalties in existing format or an updated format similar to Wasilla. So what they did is they took that information, I just kind of copied and pasted and sent that to legal, and they came back with this red line copy where they updated that chapter 8.06 to public nuisances and abandoned property. So not just abandoned property, which is what we have now, keeping the same section titles.
And you're on page 33.
Yep, sorry, jumping back to page 33 to go through the ordinance itself. And then in here, you'll see that they updated the sections, everything in red underline is new, to expand those public nuisances and abandoned properties abatement procedures. So there's definitions in here, again, as requested for abandon and abandonment, junk vehicle, junk, trash, and city land, because those are all used within the ordinance itself. And then further defining that a public nuisance can be declared for abandoned property, junk, and trash. Before it was more specific to vehicles, so we're expanding it from vehicles to property, which is why the commission is a part of this discussion. And making just adding in language, property on which the following conditions exist is a public nuisance detrimental to the health, safety, and welfare of the inhabitants of the city. And then having the A, B, C, and D, where they talk about property where junk or trash is deposed or scattered, property where abandoned property or junk vehicles are within plain view, property where trash, garbage, animal waste, or other wastes are stored in a manner which creates public health hazard, buildings, except those that have been boarded up up at all doors and windows, and other openings sufficient to prevent ingress and otherwise secured. So if your building is not secured, then it becomes considered, it can be declared a public nuisance. Then following that, public nuisances and other acts prohibited, enumeration that no person shall allow, maintain, permit a public nuisance to exist on city land, that the city shall have met its burden of proof for a public notice that nuisance of items consisting of public nuisance are in plain view from the right of way, easement, or other city land for a period of 30 days. Also, if there's a reason to believe that by action or inaction, that the property owner has failed to correct a serious health or safety violation at or near any building on the surrounding property. Then it provides for the investigation by the city manager, and then upon that determination by the city manager or designee, they may issue an enforcement order consistent with municipal code in accordance with this chapter. And nothing in this section shall be construed to limit the right of the city to pursue common law remedies to summarily abate public nuisance. And these enforcement orders then are described. And it's, it's an in-depth process. And that the city can require the abatement of that nuisance by the removal or screening, so fences, removal, whatever it takes I shouldn't say whatever it takes, but measures that can help eliminate that public nuisance. And then that enforcement order will require a property to be brought within compliance within 30 days, unless the city stipulates in writing that there's a good cause to extend the deadline. And enforcement orders may require this discontinuation of the use, the removal again, the restoration, or any other lawful action considered necessary by the city. The enforcement order shall be noticed, and all activity listed in the enforcement order shall cease until the order is rescinded or removed. So then when you look at that notice well, I'm jumping, so let me not jump that. The failure to abide by the enforcement is can constitute a violation subject to a minor offense fine. The abatement to abate an imminent or existing public nuisance or hazard to public health, safety, or welfare. An enforcement order does not need to be issued before any lawful action is commenced with respect to a violation of this code. So if it's a hazard to public health or safety, an imminent, I should say, then that 30 days doesn't apply. The pendency of any proceeding regarding an enforcement order issued does not stay any other legal action. So if there's other legal actions, this isn't not gonna stay that. And let's see here. So again, talking about the fine. And that this other section, this is where you guys come in. So the person or owner subject to notice and demand for removal under the section may appeal a fine imposed under the section to the Seldovia Planning Commission pursuant to the appeals procedure 1892-010060. There is a potential that might change in the future. We are looking at exploring what it would look like to have an administrative hearing officer. So if that's the case, that and other sections of code would be updated, but right now this is consistent with code. Then again, further talking about civil remedies and penalties, and let's see here. Those are all fairly standard. Can go to Superior Court. Subdivision. Damages may be recovered. Civil penalty not exceeding $500 for each violation, and attorney's fees can be imposed. And so on and so forth. Again, back to that minor offense fine schedule. And then moving on to 8.06070, notice to owner of property of violation of ordinance and demand for removal. Talks about the noticing procedures again, those 30 days of notice. And this goes back to that previous section or 2 sections ago when I talked about the notice shall be given.
I
Yes,
have a little, that paragraph there,
yes.
the second line down, it says demanding, this is the black words. It says
Mhm.
demanding that the property be removed from the property. And it's
Mhm.
like, too many properties.
Okay.
And I don't know how to make it better. I guess the nuisance property be removed.
Demanding that the nuisance be removed. That's a good catch. I'll have to figure out how to do that better. Okay, and then again, going over that notice, those notice requirements, and that a fine may be imposed. And then the next section talks about, and was already in there, just with some minor changes, that 30 days and updating the language to meet, to add in the new sections, that if the city manager it gives notice, or after they give notice and waiting 30 days, that they can have the property removed by a city truck or commercial entity to any suitable place for the disposal of the rubbish and unsightly debris for disposal or for storage and impounding. Not that we necessarily want to do that, but I guess there's a vehicle in the street and banded vehicle and it's declared a public nuisance and it doesn't move, the city could move it afterwards. And then just fixing some of those numbering, adding in impoundment under 8.060, it would be, the new number would be 080. Updating the dates under sale and hearing notice. Contents of sale, impoundment fees stay the same, and then exceptions is included now. That it doesn't, that the exceptions, that these activities aren't applicable to commercial or public storage facilities, junk salvage yards, refuse areas, landfills, trash transfer sites, and septic waste facilities, inoperative and unlicensed vehicles that are located on the premises of a legally operating motor vehicle sales, service, and repair business if the vehicles are subject to an active repair order and will be removed within a reasonable time frame. So can't declare those a public notice or public nuisance. Any initial thoughts or questions on this draft?
What I was just, I was looking more at the section, I just said the property and the property is, this public nuisance is all on public city land.
No.
No, okay. Okay, then it should separate those properties, yeah.
I think
Okay.
that was how our previous code read.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Change.
Okay.
Yeah, this is expanding that code to include private property.
And on page 40, is that a clean version? That's an A.
Yes, that's a clean version from legal. So you can see it in its entirety.
Yeah, so on page 40 would be without the changes or with the changes
Oh, yeah.
made, how it would look as a clean version of that.
But that section 8.06.030 in this, on page 42, it's right on the top of the page.
Mhm.
Um, A under that says no person shall allow, maintain, or permit a public nuisance to exist on city land. So public nuisance is on city land. But maybe the other thing, the abandoned stuff isn't anywhere. Or that,
Is,
It's a good question. I can look into that further and bring back a response to that.
okay.
should it be city limits?
It's a good question.
Oh, within city.
Should it be within the city
to anything.
limits? Yeah, I mean, if it just seems like, because if you're trying to
It,
be more encompassing than it used to be, it would seem like.
and you're right, because if you look at the page before on 41 under F, it says city land is defined as all land within the city limits and or under the city's zoning authority.
Oh,
So it does include everything.
so it's not city owned land, it's land within the city.
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
And whether, so if we're trying to do things that are plain English kind of
Mhm.
approach, it may be land within the city limits, like, and
Mhm.
whatever the legal, I know you're trying to do things according to legal terms, but this may be something, especially a new thing, saying
Mhm.
land within the city limits,
Mhm.
then it would be, anybody reading this would understand what that meant wherever they hit wherever they were looking in the code, because it wouldn't always necessarily make sense if you didn't have a context.
Mhm.
Clarifies it for me. Yeah.
So I guess basically this addition to the code gives a way to address I guess unsightly
Public nuisances.
public nuisances within the city limits. Is that kind of, that's what's trying to be accomplished by
That-
all of this?
Yes, that's the intent.
And whether, I mean, it's unsightly, hazardous, safety issue, but um, it has an impact either, and it can have an impact on neighbors for a variety of reasons, but it's just working towards making things where things that need to be cleaned up, there's a mechanism for taking care of that.
Correct.
Yes. Hallelujah. Now, that'll be but fun to enforce.
So do you guys need more time to think about this, review this, want it to come back to another meeting? What are your thoughts for next steps?
Commissioner Kroll, do you have any comments?
No, sorry.
Commissioner Forsberg, do you have any feedback on, or are you okay with this? So, because I guess it's the choice, updating this and then providing it to the city council or having it come back for more discussion. Is that kind of what we're checking in on?
what happened. As far as changes.
Right, and I'm not necessarily advocating, I'm just checking in, it's like, are we, and when we can go ahead and vote to to have the staff update it based on our discussion and sent over to the city council for review, is that the will of the body? And then, the staff has gotten feedback from the commission and so can go forward with it. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll call for the or guess let me just take a moment and just think about the language to use here.
I think this is good, yeah.
Yeah.
I have this stuff on page 47, is that the old? Used to be in code?
Yes. Yeah, so if you see anything that comes up before it's sent to council, let me know.
So let me run this by you. So I would ask for a motion for the staff to update the abandoned property code into the proposed ordinance for the city based on the feedback from the commission. And if I could have a motion to that effect. So motion for the staff to update I guess it's section 8 point, because it's that you'll be transmitting it as an ordinance, a proposed ordinance, but you're updating section 8.06. Because it used to, it is currently the abandoned property code, correct? So
And referring or and recommending it to the city council.
update the proposed ordinance, proposed. Let's see.
Or it could be,
There's- So, a motion for the staff to update the draft ordinance with changes identified by the commission? Is that?
and then where do you want it to go, back here, or do you want to recommend it to the
And,
council?
And, is it forward to the city council? for
Recommend.
Recommend? So motion for the staff to update the draft ordinance with changes ID'd by the commission and recommend to the city council. So if I could have a motion and a second for that, to that effect.
Yes, I would move to do what you just stated.
Okay,
Have
and
it read.
Can I
And
read that back for the
they're all,
records to make sure?
actually just,
Oh.
there you go. That's why I needed to think about it before I didn't want to. So, and then if I could have a second to that
I'll
effect,
second for both, yeah.
okay. And the language has been provided to the city clerk.
All right, let's call the roll.
Thank you.
Commissioner Forsberg,
Yes.
Commissioner Sweet,
Yes,
Commissioner Kroll,
Yes.
Commissioner Ryan.
Yes.
That is 4 yeas, Madam Chair.
thank you. And so that concludes our discussion for the draft abatement ordinance. And the next item is H3, which is the 2014 Seldovia Comprehensive Plan Update Timeline and Virtual Meeting webpage. And I'll turn that over to staff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you will see on page 77 that the Seldovia City Council approved a service agreement with the Alaska Municipal League for comprehensive planning services to update the 2014 Seldovia Comprehensive Plan and authorize the city manager to execute those appropriate documents. You will also see the agreement to follow on page 78, and I just thought that was important to call out that the AML that the city has requested AML to develop and implement a strategy to provide the following services: data management, public involvement and stakeholder engagement, and plan development. And those are in reference to the Seldovia Comprehensive Plan. And then under the scope of work on page 80, really kind of lays out the scope of work that AML has agreed to provide under the service agreement. And so that's the project initiation and coordination. They've been meeting with staff and stakeholders to confirm objectives and deliverables, coordination with KPED for demographic updates, and they're already working on those. The demographic analysis and community profile update. That's what I think that's really what they're working on. So we've had a couple of drafts sent to us of just like cleaning up not cleaning up, that's not the right word. They've just pulled the language out of the comprehensive plan without all the pictures and the other, visual things, and just made it so it's an editable language copy. And then from that, providing the red line copy that I completed and shared with the Planning Commission and the City Council of potential recommended changes are going to be transferred into that. And then they're working on compiling that demographic snapshot of the community and updating it and that information, as well as that they recommended maybe putting the history as an appendix. So having the demographic information, everything up front, talking about the plan itself, and then an appendix with the history. And so they are doing that plan review and formatting, and then will help us draft the updated plan and help. So preparing that final document for adoption by the city of Seldovia and providing support materials and presentation for public hearing and approval process. That also includes providing, and you'll see that under number 3, the public engagement and input for the planning. So they created a storyboard map webpage, which City Clerk Diamond will share, and then working with us to develop a detailed public engagement strategy. We did have a flyer go out with the billing regarding the virtual meeting page, and we'll do a little bit more posting about it this week to hopefully get more people engaged and involved with it. And then we're planning a community meeting either at the end of this month or mid-July. Hoping to get a lot of people in here and and involved with some big visuals. We've talked about, printing some big visual boards and having that in-person discussion. I'm hoping to solicit that feedback, so that those changes, can be, or those recommendations can be utilized, for updating the plan. So this is the storyboard, if you haven't had a chance to look at it. And of course, the plan is extensive, so not trying to focus on everything, but initially focusing on the goals and focus areas, and really just asking the public what is still applicable, what needs to change, what should be included. So get kind of an overview of the plan itself, and what the Alaska Planning Commission Handbook says about the plan, and then the history of the plan. So if you want, you can go back and look at all of the published plans for the city of Seldovia if you really want to dig deep, which is fantastic if you do. And then and the Planning Commission review that was done in 2021. And then they utilize the review that was just done for this web page. So 2025 comprehensive plan update is in process. And if we keep going down, look at some nice visuals about, we're talking about the city of Seldovia. That's the plan area.
Doesn't include all their stuff.
And then the five plan elements of the 2014 Seldovia comp plan are economy, transportation, land use, community, human resources, and environment. We've talked about those extensively because that's what's in the plan. So then the next sections will go through each of those 5 elements, starting with economy, gives a brief overview of that element. If you remember, they're each like full pages or multi-pages to discuss about the element itself. So brief overview, and then it has the goals with the focuses underneath, and it provides what the staff and commission had indicated for each of those goals and focus areas, if it was progress, some substantial progress, some progress, or little or no progress. And then when you get down to the bottom of goals and focuses, there's a survey section right there, with 3 questions. So because this is a lot, so trying to just really focus in people's responses about how do these economic focus areas reflect Seldovia's needs? Are there economic goals that should be added or removed in the Seldovia Comprehensive Plan? And then do you have suggestions for implementing these economic focus areas? And that's the next step, because if you remember, we have this whole other section on implementation. So getting the feedback like, yes, these things should be in there, no, those things shouldn't. And then this is how you should accomplish those things is the goal, to get that feedback back from individuals. That way, moving forward in the draft, we really have a good idea of what is or isn't meeting the community's needs and how the community would like to see us move forward with those. So we don't have to scroll through the rest unless you guys want to see it. There's some really pretty pictures, but I just follow suit for the other 4 elements. And then that's just kind of a basic like a basic overview for the community to be able to provide that initial feedback on the existing plan. And from there, we'll move forward to draft new updated plan, and have more periods of time and more avenues to ask for public input on the draft. Any thoughts, questions? We were hoping to have this close on the 16th. I think we might extend it. It'll depend on when the public hearing or the community meeting is going to be held. I don't have the date for that yet, but I'll let you guys know. So certainly if you guys have the opportunity and you want to provide feedback, that would be helpful. And as well as, letting people know if they have questions about what's happening, that this is a really great opportunity to be able to get in on the ground floor discussion of what this plan is or isn't doing.
Does any of the commissioners have any comments? Commissioner Forster?
Oh, excellent question through the chair. So Alaska Municipal League they are not lawyers. They're actually, a lot of them are planners. But Alaska Municipal League is an organization in the state that we have a membership with along with a lot of other municipalities. So it's a municipal organization that provides conferences and education and services to municipalities. They also follow the legislative activity at the state very closely. So they let us know what's impacting municipalities, and they provide that voice from municipalities back to the state. So it's a municipal organization. Could you describe it further?
Yes, and they've recently kind of expanded their scope to include helping small municipalities out with services that we may not have the capacity for. For example, they helped out with the Port Infrastructure Development Project grant for Jackaloff. And community planning was the need that was identified as well. So they've offered help.
So.
Yes, yeah. So they yes.
Just trying to find, read through this, during that thing, and so. Kind of work, or this city of Seldovia. But. That goes to Seldovia, but
Page.
So it's in the comprehensive plan. It's also on the homepage as well.
maybe
Okay, I'll look into our webpage is not the most mobile friendly, but I'll look at it and see what,
but I
how
found it
to.
because it says.
And maybe we could update the notice to have that page, have it to their comprehensive plan page.
So, one of the things that I would suggest is that as well as the public asking for them to provide feedback, it seemed like our nonprofits and our service organizations, the recreational service area organization, but it would be really good to have communication plan to work with those entities so that we get the back and forth in terms of the things that are important there and how that they might, what things do they see based on their missions. The other thing I would say is that in this last legislative session, there was language added to, it's not a requirement, but it's a suggestion, or it's at least available within the planning handbook to have housing development plans. And that's something that our community has provided us with feedback, and we've had some level of discussion. We've also, we've kind of engaged and then sort of disengaged because we also have a limit in terms of what we can actually do. But I just wanted to alert you to the fact that housing development planning is something specific that the legislature identified to put into the commission handbook. So we have that. And of course, there's no budget increment on that, but it's just highlighting an area that's important to communities. And so that may be something that AML may have some ability to advise us on. It may be something that could be added to our comprehensive plan so that we actually have that as a strategic objective, if that's what the community wants, but at least to maybe get some feedback on that particular issue, because it is important aspect. And even in our subcommittee, the business owners were talking about, the lack of places for workers to be able to stay in. So it's just kind of the things that we've heard to kind of incorporate that in terms of I think that should be at least evaluated. Are there any other further comments? Commissioner Cole, do you have any comments?
No, that looks good. I'm available to help out though if you need anything.
Thank you so much. And this staff. So, for us, your thoughts?
Not at this time.
What specific organizations with the tribe?
Yeah. Yes, I think casting that net, you know, to the, to.
Harbor.
Fishermen's Association.
I mean, there is
Fish-
our master association, and it's not specific to. There is a holding corporation. We can look into that.
Seems like whatever as broad as you can in the organizations will be hard. And not, yeah. And not even, and beyond, you know, our city limits, because our comprehensive plan does, though, you know, it does talk about the region as well. I mean, our current one does, so if, at least we should be determining if we're wanting to cover that. But we should also kind of understand who are,
Well, like the Jackalock dock would be part of the plan, 'cause
Mhm.
it's city.
yes,
So like the lab would be a potential entity rather than individuals.
right.
Okay.
So whatever, I guess it's the partnerships, it's the people affected by the comprehensive plan, but to have the ability to at least engage and kind of see where that is. And there, some things may be germane to people and others may not, but it's giving them the opportunity to communicate with the city about, you know, what is being undertaken.
Would it be fair? So then from what I'm hearing from you guys, we could send out a personal invitation to all of those organizations to provide input on this survey. And then, be listed on our public notice list and get updates as things go through. And then, again, at the draft, at the time of the draft, sending out that personal invite to review or just throughout the process, we can do that.
It sounds like a great idea.
What was the timeline that for public input in that meeting?
So the timeline for the public input was by the 16th. And then the meeting doesn't have a time yet, but we were looking at the end of June or mid-July. So I'll let you guys know when we get a time settled.
And you're thinking that you may extend the deadline
Yeah.
beyond the 16th, but you're still evaluating that?
Well, especially if we are sending out that personal invite, maybe we extend to the end of June so people have that time. Does that sound fair to everybody?
Sounds, yeah. It would be good to involve people if they, so that they're aware.
Yeah.
So, are we, any further, or we can close this agenda item out? Okay, and so the next item is staff reports. Is that just? So, throw it over to the staff.
Yeah, I guess so. We have under the staff reports, the upcoming and open commission business that we've had. So Cedar Street Extension has been on there for quite some time, hanging out. There hasn't been that much movement on that, but the conversation has restarted with the land and property owners. I think there was some good survey. Surveys just show where the. No, that hasn't happened yet because we don't have all the still on board yet. That's that the so yeah, right now looking at the property owners to get together. And for buildings or working on the draft ordinance to change building permits to reflect more of a zoning permit. And this is a built out of that topographical impact. So there is a draft ordinance that we're working on and updating the building permit to reflect that. I think that would be ready for the next meeting.
Hopefully, it's big, similar to the commercial business district, so, ordinance, so it's, we've got a good start, and then it'll be coming to you guys, with questions and feedback on where to go from it, from there, so. It's just taking, it's involved, so it's taking a little bit of time, but, I think we are.
And is there any business that the commission feels like we don't have on here to keep track of? I feel like these are the two open. And there's no questions on that. Just a quick update on the building permits to date for 2025. We currently have 2 open building permits. And we have, I think it's 12 total for 2025. And I expect one more building permit to come in. But I don't know if it will be in by the end of the fiscal year. We would hope so. And with that, as the name manager Gagel pointed out, we're working on, or I'm working on the updating of the planning website. With that, we'll hopefully include at least the application status for the building permits that have been set in. So those are available at a little more public view. And are there any questions? Right. Well, I guess the next staff report.
Yeah, so if you don't mind indulging me a little bit, I do a city manager's update at every council meeting, and we've discussed in the past that especially for reviewing the comprehensive plan, sometimes it can be difficult if you guys don't know what's happening within the city. So if you guys would like, I can go through, and again, I meant to have a lay down on this, but the time did not work, but going off of the city manager's, report that was provided to the city council at their May 27th meeting. And I can provide you a written copy of that if you'd like, with a few changes that have happened in the last week. But starting off with the city of Seldovia received a letter of resignation from Councilmember Kennedy. There is going to be a declaration of a vacancy of a city council seat presented to the Seldovia City Council at their June 16th meeting. That'll be a special meeting. They were going to have a regular meeting on the 9th, but instead of holding 2 meetings that month, potentially moving to just one special meeting on the 16th as they approach the busy summer season. So declaring that vacancy for a city council member seat, and then public notice will go out after that. If you know anybody who is interested, who's in city limits, who is a registered voter, who's interested in serving on city council, please let us know.
Whoa.
And I guess we are still on backups online. Henry, are you still with us?
Yeah.
Oh.
Oh, weird one.
We're just experiencing a power outage that's coming on and off.
I'm curious if Henry can still hear us. Commissioner Kroll?
Is emergency.
Should we just continue and close?
Yeah, I could just go through real quickly and, or we can close out and I can provide you guys a written copy either way of the city manager's report. Whatever you guys would prefer.
I guess if we can just continue and, because it's recording, we don't have video, but we're connected and we have audio. So I think we can just continue forward and then,
Sure. I'll just try to make that brief. So, the Seldovia City Council did pass their FY 26 budget at that May 27th meeting. And that did include a 2.9% inflation increase for water and sewer utility services, harbor, mortgage fees, except for annuals and daily mortgage fees, which will remain the same, and boat storage fees. We did get our notice of contribution back from AML which is our insurance company. Now, they're merging in with another company, so they'll be last risk alliance, as of July 1. And actually, our rate has gone down, so that, even though that's not reflected in the budget, that will be a positive addition to it. Our risk specialist, our risk control specialist, a site visit last week. Of interest to you guys potentially is there was a 2025 National Estuarine Research Reserve. One is for the University of Alaska parcel surrounding the water treatment plant, and one for by and surrounding Torino Lake. So they will be looking at the proposals on Thursday, and if that's something that their council wants to pursue, they'll help us with a proposal on the national level. Additionally, the KVNR invited us to a freshwater resources workshop at the Homer Reservoir. So myself, council member Barber, and water operator Amanda Miller, our public works operator Amanda Miller, are going over this Friday. They're going to do a tour of a park and a tour of water treatment plant, and then freshwater resource management. And so that should be a really water management can extend to Seldovia and across the bay. Jackloff, we were supposed to have a site visit from Merritt on Monday, but they weren't able to get travel approval. However, we did receive a letter of approval from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife and should be receiving a letter of concurrence from the National Marine Fisheries Services. I saw a draft of that today. The local multi-agency permit was submitted to Kenai River Center. And once those are finalized, we'll be able to wrap up the need of the draft grant contract. And so issue for construction and the draft is moving ahead. We are still kind of waiting at a standstill with the EPA for our wall replacement project up. We're gonna replace the lower 1,050 feet of the raw water transmission line, which is thin walled steel from the 1960s and is leaking. So we were told that the funding was going to be opened last week and it wasn't. Still working through that steps with them, but should be available here in the next couple of weeks, hopefully. And then we'll issue an RFP for the design build to repair that infrastructure. So that's a really important priority of the city council and the city to be able to, you know, maintain our water infrastructure.
Yeah, that's a
big
big
lot.
Big project.
Yeah. We also have two grants that were approved by the last Clean Water Action. That was for Main Street inlets and Vista and Frank Raby Stormwater Improvement Project. So the Main Street inlets is designed for a new inlet, a new stormwater inlet by the Gateway Pavilion crossing Main Street. And then replacing the inlet that is by the Seldovia liquor store going out to the boat ramp. We're waiting on approval from DOT to be able to make those repairs as well. And then the Vista and Frank Raby Stormwater Improvement Project is to replace culverts and Vista Avenue and in Frank Raby. And it also included a new street sweeper attachment for our front loaders so that we can do some street sweeping as needed without having to wait for a street sweeper to come across the bay from DOT. So that's exciting. We talked about AML a little bit in the last discussion. The other thing that AML is doing for us is they are providing grant writing services. So the city signed on $10,000 for up to 3 grants to be written by AML. They have written a few grants for us in the past, including the Port and Infrastructure Development Program grant, which we received for Jackloff. They also helped us with a big CCG grant, which with new administration, it seems like has gone to the wayside. But really, they're a great asset for providing complex grant applications and really giving you that background and the little bit of extra that we need as a small community to be competitive. So not for the smaller grants, staff are still writing those, but we're talking large grants like potential. We've talked about initially the boardwalk, the harbor boardwalk, and as an alternative transportation pathway. We talked about improving the historic boardwalk / Bay Street, and then we've talked about either finishing the Valley Added building, or that the city has a need for a heavy equipment storage complex. So those are some of the things. Oh, but more importantly than those last two, that we have some dam repairs that are needed. And we did have a rough order of magnitude cost estimate for those, and it was in the millions. So to make those repairs. We also had our PSI, which is a periodic safety inspection on the dam, which we have to have every 3 years, last month. And I asked the engineers who perform that safety inspection if outside of the scope of that PSI, in addition, that they could help provide a list of priorities to the city, or prior to prioritizing those needs, and the cost, a more in-depth cost estimate for those needs, so that we can pursue funding for that project. You guys are aware of the 2014 comprehensive update. So next thing is we did receive a FY 2024 CDBG grant award for the repair of the fuel retail building roof. So we're working through the paperwork on that so that we can repair that roof. And we are working on, we submitted our applications for the senior meals grant with the state. The pressure washer is broken, just so you guys know, if you haven't noticed. And so we're working on getting an electrician over. We did plan a spring cleanup project week, but that did not pan out. Huh? Darn. But that did not pan out. And then I think that's telling me that my time is coming to an end. There's still a few other things. But yes, if you want to know more what's going on at the city, look at this report. I can, like I said, provide it to you, and happy to talk about it more. We're also talking about pool closure and what that's going to look like in the city for keeping it open, or in the community, I should say. And the KPB Tourism Industry Working Group closed with a recommendation, 3 recommendations, but one of those to the Kenai Peninsula Borough Assembly for a change in the sales tax rate structure to go to a seasonal sales tax of 2% in the winter and 4% in the summer. So we'll see if the assembly picks that up. And we submitted a Seldovia wetland assessment project with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. It's a pre-proposal to assess all of our wetlands. We're working on getting a generator for this building. We're working on new radios for the volunteer fire and EMS. And we have water meters, 10 water meters that we're looking to install in various structures in the community as a pilot metering program. Septic lift station repair placement project was completed. So we now have 2 working pumps down there. And we're also looking at and submitted a grant application for cybersecurity improvements, working on city yard cleanup, harbor repair. We have our maintenance person, Stan Coleman, back on, working on maintenance at the harbor. We have our groundskeeper, Allison Ryan, back on, doing amazing work around the community, cleaning up the grounds. So it looks pretty good out there. If you see that, thank Allison. And we also submitted a grant application in partnership with Seldovia Village Tribe submitted it for, and we are a part of it, but they'll be the project lead for assessing the need for Fish Creek Dam and potentially that removal. So I know there's more roads, all kinds of other things happening, maintenance in the community, but that's a pretty good overview of where we're at right now. Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we'll just continue on. Items, informational items not requiring action. I don't believe we have anything for that. Comments from the public. Do we have any members of the public anymore on? Okay, so,
We did these kind of ways.
okay. And then, any comments from the commission members?
Good to get through this, CV district review and good to have that done. Thanks for all the hard work, all that.
And Commissioner Forsberg, do you have anything?
Covered a lot of areas.
Aye, aye. And then always thank you to everyone, for everyone's hard work, very much appreciated. And then our next regular meeting is, July 2nd, 2025. And motion to adjourn.
I will make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you. I guess a second.
I'll second it.
Okay, we're adjourned. It is 6:30, or sorry, 8, is it 8:30?
Wow.
8:31. So thank you for your patience.
That was amazing.